The judge laughed first, not a chuckle, not a polite clearing of the throat, a real laugh, the kind that fills a room, bounces off wood-paneled walls, and lands on you like something meant to humiliate. Nadia laughed too. That was the name of the opposing attorney, Nadia Osei. She laughed with her hand over her mouth, which somehow made it worse. The only person who didn't react was the one standing at the defense table. Celeste Holt was 23 years old. She was wearing a blazer she had borrowed from her neighbor because she didn't own one. She had a manila folder in her left hand and a yellow legal pad in her right, and when the laughter settled, she set both of them on the table and looked at the judge and said, very quietly, "We're ready to proceed, Your Honor." The judge, a man named Douglas Hale, who had been on the bench for 22 years and never once questioned whether that made him qualified, leaned forward and said, "Young lady, are you telling me you intend to represent your grandmother yourself?" "Yes, sir." "You're not a licensed attorney?" "No, sir." "But I'm her granddaughter, and under Georgia law, a party may represent themselves or be assisted by a non-attorney family member in certain civil proceedings. I have the statute printed if you'd like to review it." She said it like she was reading a grocery list. No tremor, no apology. Judge Hale stared at her for a long moment. Then he leaned back and said, "We'll see. Let me back up, because none of this started in a courtroom. It started on a Tuesday morning in late October, when Celeste got a phone call from a number she didn't recognize and answered it anyway, because she had been waiting 3 weeks for a callback from a job she needed desperately, and she was answering every number she didn't know. It wasn't the job. It was her grandmother's neighbor, an older woman named Lenora Briggs, who had lived across the street from Nana Rose for 11 years, and who had Celeste's number saved in her phone for exactly this kind of emergency. "Your grandmother," Lenora said, "is sitting on her front porch in her nightgown. It's 41 degrees. Celeste was in Atlanta. Nana Rose was in Harlan County, a small township in the eastern part of the state that most people drove through without stopping. She had lived in the same house for 44 years. She had raised 4 children in that house, buried one of them, and refused to leave it every time someone suggested she might be more comfortable somewhere else. "I'm not going to a facility," she said once to Celeste's mother. "I'll go out of this house feet first." She was 81 years old, and she meant every word. Celeste drove 3.5 hours without stopping. When she pulled up to the house on Caldwell Road, she found Nana Rose exactly where Lenora had described. Sitting in the blue plastic chair on the porch, in her nightgown, looking out at the empty road with an expression that wasn't confusion, exactly, more like concentration, like she was trying to remember the name of something she used to know. "Nana." The old woman looked up. "Baby," she said, and smiled, and for a moment she was entirely herself again, warm and certain and present. Then the moment passed. The doctor at the county clinic called it moderate cognitive decline. He said it in a way that was meant to sound gentle, but mostly just sounded like he was reading from a form. "She's going to need more support," he told Celeste. "She can't be living alone." Celeste knew that. What she didn't know yet was that someone else already knew it too, and had been planning around it for months. His name was Roland Voss. He was the executor of her grandfather's estate, a man her grandfather had trusted because they had gone to the same church for 30 years, sat in the same pew, shared the same ushers, and the same potluck Sundays. Roland was the kind of man who made himself indispensable quietly. He kept the records. He made the calls. He remembered the dates. After Celeste's grandfather passed, 3 years before this story begins, Roland had helped Nana Rose with the paperwork, the will, the property transfer, the small investment accounts. He had been patient and attentive, and he had done it all without asking for a fee, which Nana Rose had mentioned more than once as evidence of his good character. "He's a good man," she said. "Old school." What Nana Rose didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Roland had also prepared a document 6 months after the funeral. a property amendment, a rider to the deed, signed, apparently, by Nana Rose herself, transferring a 50% interest in the Caldwell Road property to Roland in exchange for ongoing estate management services. Celeste found it in a filing folder inside a drawer of her grandmother's secretary desk, slipped in between a utility bill and a birthday card. She read it twice, then a third time. Then she sat down on the floor of her grandmother's living room and stayed there for a while. There is a particular kind of grief that comes from realizing someone you trusted has been working against you. It's not loud. It doesn't feel like anger right away. It feels like the floor went a little soft under your feet. Like something that was supposed to hold you decided not to. Celeste had been in the Army for 4 years. She had done 2 deployments. She had trained for exactly the kind of situation where your first instinct is panic, and your job is to override it, to breathe, to assess, to move. She breathed. She assessed. The document was dated 14 months ago. Her grandmother's signature was at the bottom, but it looked wrong. Not dramatically wrong, not obviously forged, just slightly too neat, too consistent, like someone who had practiced it. Celeste photographed everything. Then she called 3 attorneys. The first one told her it would cost $8,000 up front to take the case. The second one said the document, on its face, appeared valid, and that challenging it would be difficult. The third one didn't call back. She sat with that for one night only. Then she went to the county courthouse and pulled every public record she could find. The deed, the amendment, the filing date, the notarization. The notarization was done by a woman named Phoebe Adler, who was a notary public in the county. Celeste wrote that name down. Then she went home and started reading. She had been a signals intelligence analyst in the Army, which meant, among other things, that she was very good at finding things that didn't fit. Small mismatches, timing inconsistencies, details that had been placed too carefully. She read the Georgia Code on property transfers until 2 in the morning. She read case law on contested deed amendments. She read everything she could find about notarization requirements in the state. Specifically, the requirement that a notary must personally witness a signature and verify the identity of the person signing. Then she called Nana Rose's primary care physician and asked a very specific question. 14 months ago, do you have records showing when she was seen? The doctor's office called her back the next morning. 14 months ago, on the exact date listed. On the deed amendment, Nana Rose had been admitted to the county hospital for a urinary tract infection. She had been there for 3 days. She had been, by the notes in her chart, in a state of acute delirium, a common and serious complication in elderly patients with infections. She had not been home. She had not been lucid. She had not signed anything. Celeste wrote that down too. She wrote, she was in the hospital. The signature is impossible. Roland filed to take possession of his alleged 50% interest in the property the week after Celeste's arrival. His attorney was a woman named Nadia Osei, sharp, experienced, and clearly accustomed to winning cases where the other side couldn't afford to fight back. Celeste showed up to the first hearing alone. She had printed the relevant statutes. She had organized her documents in labeled folders. She had written out her arguments in careful, precise language, the way she had once written after action reports, structured, specific, no wasted words. When Nadia saw her walk in without representation, she smiled the way people smile when they think they already know how something ends. When Judge Hale saw the same thing, he laughed. You know this part. We started here. What you don't know yet is what happened in the 3 minutes after the judge stopped laughing. Celeste waited. She had learned how to wait. She had waited in the dark for things she couldn't name, and she had waited quietly, and she had never once flinched when something loud happened close to her. She waited now the same way, upright, still, hands flat on the table. When the room settled, she said, I'd like to submit 6 documents into evidence, Your Honor. I'll walk you through each one. Nadia said, Objection. She's not an attorney. She can't present evidence. Celeste said, actually, under Georgia Code Section 15, 1914, a pro se litigant may present evidence in a civil proceeding on their own behalf. I'm representing my grandmother as her designated non-attorney representative. The code permits this. She had memorized the citation. She said it without looking at her notes. The judge looked at Nadia. Nadia said, "The code is narrow. She would need to demonstrate." "I have the code printed," Celeste said. "Page 3 of my packet, tab B." There was a silence. Judge Hale said, "Proceed." The first document was the deed amendment itself. "This is Exhibit A," Celeste said. "A property amendment signed, allegedly, by my grandmother, Rose Annabelle Carter, on October 14th of last year. This document purports to transfer a 50% interest in the property at 412 Caldwell Road to Roland Voss in exchange for estate management services." She set it down. "The second document is my grandmother's hospital admission record from the same date." She set that down. October 14th. Admitted at 7:42 in the morning. Discharged October 17th. The admitting physician's notes describe her as disoriented, febrile, and non-responsive to time and place orientation questions. She let that sit for a moment. She was in a hospital bed. She was delirious. She did not sign this document on October 14th. She could not have. Nadia was already on her feet. "Your Honor, the hospital record speaks to her condition, not her location for every hour of that day. There's no proof she didn't. The admission record shows continuous monitoring." Celeste said, "Every 4 hours. She was checked on October 14th at 7:42, 11:30, 3:15, and 7 p.m. She was in that hospital for every recorded hour of that day. I have the nurse's notes as a supplemental exhibit." She set down a third document. The room was very quiet. Roland Voss was sitting in the gallery. He had come to watch what he expected to be a formality, the quick legal disposal of a challenge he didn't believe anyone was actually capable of mounting. He was a man who had spent a long time making himself useful to people who were grieving or frightened or confused. He had learned that those people rarely fought back. They were too tired, too overwhelmed, too trusting. He had not accounted for Celeste. She didn't look at him once. Not when she was presenting her documents, not when Nadia objected for the 4th time and was overruled, not even when Judge Hale picked up the hospital record and put his reading glasses on and read it, slowly, for what felt like a very long time. She looked at the judge. She looked at her notes. She looked at the table. She did not need Roland to understand what was happening. She already knew. The question came at the end. Everything had been presented. The hospital record, the nurse's notes, a copy of the notarization filing, which listed the location of the signing as the home address on Caldwell Road, physically incompatible with the hospital admission record, a statement from Nana Rose's physician attesting to her cognitive state over the preceding 2 years. Nadia had objected 12 times. She had been overruled 10 of them and sustained twice on procedural grounds. She had argued that the hospital record was inconclusive. She had argued that the notarization was valid on its face. She had argued that Celeste's grandmother might have left the hospital briefly, an argument she abandoned when Celeste produced the continuous monitoring logs. She was running out of ground. Then Celeste turned to face her directly and said, "I have one question for Mr. Voss, if the court allows." Judge Hale looked at Nadia, then at Celeste. "Go ahead," he said. Roland was called to the stand. He sat down with the confidence of a man who believed he had covered everything. He had the document. He had the notary. He had 30 years of church attendance and a reputation in this county as a trustworthy man. Celeste looked at him. She said very simply, "Mr. Voss, who drove my grandmother to your office to sign this document?" He blinked. "I'm sorry. The notarization was performed at your business address, 88 Commerce Drive. That's 12 miles from the county hospital. My grandmother doesn't drive. She hasn't driven in 6 years. So I'm asking, who drove her there?" Roland said. I brought the document to her. The notarization record lists your office address as the location of signing. There might be an error in the. Is the address on the notarization form correct or incorrect? A pause. I'd have to review, Mr. Voss. Celeste's voice was completely even. Is the address on the notarization form, the address you filed with the county, correct or incorrect? He looked at Nadia. Nadia looked at the table. It may contain an inaccuracy, Roland said. Celeste nodded once. She turned back to the judge. The notarization is either fraudulent in its address, which would invalidate it under Georgia code, or it's accurate, which means my grandmother was not present to sign. Either way, the document is invalid. I'd move to have it struck. Judge Hale looked at Roland Voss for a long moment. Then he said, "Motion granted." The drive back to the house on Caldwell Road took 11 minutes. Celeste sat in the parking lot for a few of those minutes first, with the car running and her hands on the steering wheel, not going anywhere. Just sitting. The way you do when something you have been bracing for a long time is finally over, and your body doesn't quite know what to do with the absence of tension. She had not cried in the courtroom. She had not celebrated. She had thanked the judge, gathered her documents, and walked out. Nadia had not said anything to her on the way out. Not a word. Roland Voss was still at the defense table when she left. He looked like a man who had just realized, for the first time, that a thing he had counted on was not going to hold. Nana Rose was in the kitchen when Celeste got home. She was making something on the stove. Oatmeal, it looked like, and she turned when she heard the door and said, "You're back. You want some?" "Sure, Nana." She sat down at the kitchen table, in the chair she had sat in since she was small, the one with the slightly uneven leg that rocked if you shifted your weight wrong. The kitchen smelled like it always had. Brown sugar, old wood, something warm. "Everything okay?" her grandmother asked. "Yeah," Celeste said. "Everything's okay." Nana Rose put a bowl in front of her. She stood there for a moment, studying Celeste's face with the particular focus she sometimes had, the focus that arrived and then left again, the window that opened and then closed. "You look like your grandfather when you make that face," she said. "What face?" "The one where you've decided something." Celeste looked up at her. "I have," she said. Her grandmother patted her hand twice. Then she sat down and picked up her spoon and said, "Good." The county district attorney opened an investigation into Roland Voss 3 weeks after the hearing. Phoebe Adler, the notary, cooperated. She said she had been told that the signature had already been obtained, and that she only needed to process the paperwork, that the woman had signed somewhere else. She said she hadn't asked questions she should have asked. She lost her notary commission. Roland Voss was charged with deed fraud and elder financial exploitation. The case was pending at the time of this telling, but the DA was not someone who brought charges she didn't intend to finish. The house on Caldwell Road is still in Nana Rose's name. Only her name. There are a lot of people who counted on the idea that someone's grandmother would be too confused to defend herself. Too old, too alone, too far from anyone who would fight hard enough to matter. They didn't know about Celeste. They didn't know she had spent 4 years learning to find the thing that doesn't fit in a pattern that looks clean. They didn't know she had stayed up until 2 in the morning reading property law. They didn't know she had driven 3.5 hours on a Tuesday because a neighbor called, and that she had not left since. They didn't know any of that. That was their mistake. There is something that happens in a courtroom, or in any room, really, when someone who was supposed to be easy to dismiss refuses to be dismissed. The air changes. The people who were laughing stop laughing. They look at each other, and something passes between them that doesn't have a name exactly, but it's close to recognition. The recognition that they were wrong about who they were dealing with. Celeste drove home that day with the windows down, even though it was cold. She let the air come in. She didn't turn on the radio. Some silences are worth keeping.